everyone, and welcome to another episode of our Freight-Focused podcast. I'm Ken Adamo, Chief of Analytics at DAT, and we have a very special guest this week. We're joined by Trent Broberg, who is CEO of ACERTUS. Welcome, Trent.
Thank you, Ken. Thanks for having me, and I appreciate the time.
Yeah, for sure. So we have a lot to cover today, so I'm going to skip some of the pleasantries and dive right in. Do you mind introducing yourself a bit for our listeners and talking more about what ACERTUS really focuses on to help their customers?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. So Trent Broberg, CEO of ACERTUS. I've been on board for about a month now, so drinking from a fire hose still. But, a little bit about ACERTUS. We've been around for quite some time through many acquisitions back in the 90s. Some of these companies started. Primarily, in 2018, we combined some of these acquisitions into the company you know now as ACERTUS. ACERTUS delivers technology-enabled automotive logistics to the industry. So we focus on vehicle transport, title registration, storage, care and maintenance. Our newest offering, which is pickup and home delivery service, so white glove delivery service to your house from some of the digital dealerships out there, and compliance services. All this wrapped up into our digital marketplace.
That's really cool stuff. As I was doing some research on ACERTUS, it's really remarkable. And it seems like things are coming together at the right time for, especially the white glove pickup and delivery. I'm shopping for a car right now, and that seems like a real popular thing in the market.
Yeah, it's honestly, the market's on fire right now. The buyer behavior is probably at the highest supply or highest demand we've ever seen in the space, for sure, since I've been here at ACERTUS, obviously. But
long time,
throughout the past several years. So we've seen obviously that demand increase while supply has significantly decreased. So Ken, when you're out there looking for a new or used vehicle, the supply of new vehicles obviously has been cut by some of what we'll talk about throughout this is some of the supply chain shortages and things like that. The secondary market or remarketing channels are at the highest levels that we've ever seen, and we're seeing that through obviously our marketplace as well.
Yeah, for sure. So before we dive in and talk a lot about the auto industry and how ACERTUS plays in that space, I just have to selfishly ask, you're a seasoned freight pro. What do you think about what's going on in the general freight market right now with a specific focus on North American truckload and less than truckload?
Yeah, it's a really interesting time. Obviously, COVID has created a lot of challenges within the supply chain. What it's really exposed is the fragility of our supply chain, not just domestically, but global. So obviously what happens globally comes across our borders here and creates a ripple impact. We see that obviously in the automotive logistics space where OEMs are shutting down plants because there's shortages on some of their within their supply chain. Within the freight market, obviously in the North American freight market, it spills over into the automotive logistics space where you've got the continued tightest capacity market we've seen in recent times. You've got continued driver shortages, which I know all of your listeners have heard for probably the last 7 to 8 years or longer. You've got fuel prices that are up 30, 40% in some places year over year. So that's continued downward pressure on margins and things like that. So, there's just a unique time out there in the logistics space.
Can you give our viewers a few, because we get questions about the automotive industry all the time. There's a lot of that transportation infrastructure built around the footprint of the big three. Just a couple examples of how COVID has specifically impacted transportation and logistics around the auto manufacturing industry.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. We last year alone in 2020, we saw a 47% decline in auto sales. So that was one of the largest declines year over year that we've seen since the depression of 2008. Obviously, what that's created was an initial supply of vehicles in the 2020 timeframe. And as we've come out of COVID and consumer buying behavior has increased and people are getting back out to the dealerships, or they're leveraging some of those digital dealerships that and household brands to purchase vehicles and have them delivered to their house via ACERTUS, hopefully. we've seen a huge increase in buying behavior. So you've got this ripple effect that happened from COVID, where you had plant shutdowns, you had obviously across borders and across in the Asia Pac region, and obviously in Europe, where you had a lot of plant shutdowns, which then creates a bullwhip effect throughout the supply chain, the automotive logistics space. There's a change in mobility also, Ken. As you can imagine, people weren't traveling as much. People weren't driving. People weren't taking vacations. People weren't going to rental cars and renting, because they weren't traveling, especially for business purposes. So that created another a real dynamic change and shift within the auto logistics space.
And it doesn't sound like help's on the way immediately, right? We have chip shortages, other shortages out there. So can you talk a little bit about maybe like the near term, the next 3-4 quarters of what you expect as it pertains to logistics in the auto space?
Yeah, we've talked to several OEMs. Obviously, we partner very closely with many large dealership groups, OEMs, and fleet management companies. And really, it's the same story right now. So up throughout the supply chain, there's a semiconductor shortage, which I'm sure many of your listeners have heard about. We see, hopefully, many of the OEMs are seeing that loosen up a little bit in the Q3, Q4 timeframe as cars start to get delivered. Plants come back online here in the near term, and then production starts going again to some normalized factor. There's a foam shortage out there right now. A lot of that came from some of the Dallas or Texas plants. Once again, a ripple effect. We had this unique freeze that came across the Texas region, which obviously shut down plants in conjunction with COVID. So you've kind of got several different pressures on the supply chain that have kind of reared its ugly head here, not just in COVID, but some other maybe challenges throughout the automotive logistics space. So we see in the near term, in that Q3, Q4 timeframe, we'll see a lot of these OEMs hopefully come back online and start delivering cars back, whether it's domestically or obviously to our borders. The secondary market is still on fire. If you were to go to an auction house or try to go to your dealerships today, you're going to pay. It's going to be hard to negotiate that $500 off that you mentioned earlier, Ken, to get for that secondary or that used vehicle.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're seeing it with Class 8 trucks too, right? We're seeing, I think, 6 months in a row with over 40,000 new Class 8 truck orders, but we're hearing from a lot of the major OEMs that they're going to build the trucks and park them until the semiconductors arrive, which could be, as you mentioned, Q3, Q4 of this year. So you're just pushing the backlog into the, further into the year. So this could be a 2022 problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I was looking at some of your reporting that you did actually release yesterday and today on some of the used truck orders or the truck orders in the marketplace. And you're right. I mean, obviously, you've got to get those into production. You've got to get those semiconductors installed, and then you've got to get them into production and actually get drivers to seat those trucks to start moving. That's a big pressure on the freight industry as well as the auto industry. Another unique factor within the auto logistics space is the actual trailer and the equipment on the trailers. Lead times of 12 to 18 months we see out there because there's only really a few manufacturers of auto logistics trailers.
That's a great transition. We get a lot of inbound requests from our weekly show and just interacting with customers about, carriers or small trucking fleets that want to get into servicing the auto industry. What are some kind of unique things about the auto industry that folks should be thinking about if they want to start hauling that type of freight?
It's interesting because I've come from the freight world for nearly 20 years. And I look for analogous sectors, and it's very similar to the flatbed sector in freight. So it's a higher touch, a higher stop count. Load factor is what we would use in the auto logistics space. Is load factor, how many cars are we getting on each trip? But it's very similar to that. What I would term is that maybe an LTL, if there is such a thing, flatbed market. So there's obviously a lot of pickup and deliveries with the change in consumer buying behavior going to more digital acquisitions of cars. You could see a transition to more home deliveries and that white glove service. So as you're out there, obviously there'll be the over-the-road drivers that are delivering cars from auction houses or from dealer to dealer. That's a high touch, a high opportunity for a touch point with the customer. So there's some of those things are a little bit different than you see typically in the freight world.
And like flatbeds, right? It's a physical job, more so than backing up to a dock, right? You're out there checking load securement, loading and unloading. I mean, it could be you're out there in the elements, right? It's a more hands-on, to your point, active job as a driver.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, through our technology, right, we enable the driver for contactless, paperless solutions out there. But as you pick up or deliver every vehicle, every VIN, you've got to inspect each VIN. You've got to take, pictures of it. Obviously through our ePod service, we're doing electronic proof of deliveries and tracking on all these vehicles. So it's definitely a higher touch situation, as you can imagine, especially with a home delivery service. Because a car is typically your second largest purchase next to your house. So a lot of these individuals or receivers of these vehicles are very concerned about the quality of the service.
So another really great segue. You just mentioned a few technological advancements that have been helping you guys become more efficient and work through COVID. Has that really been accelerated as a result of COVID? The sort of adoption and rollout of these new technologies within your business?
Yeah, Ken, absolutely. The first and foremost is the pickup and delivery service that we provide. ACERTUS, had acquired a few different companies just recently in 2018 and stitched them together. And what that did was allow us to take the technology, pull it together, and offer a white glove pickup and delivery service to the house. It's obviously a contactless ePod, right? Electronic POD, which has allowed through the catalyst of COVID to continue to build out that marketplace. So as dealership groups, and digital dealers, FMCs, and obviously the OEMs that are starting to deliver straight to dealerships or to homes, we were able to leverage our technology and our marketplace to take all of those deliveries contactlessly and provide an efficient service, white glove service to the house. The other is the advent of just the general digital dealership, right? So there's a huge, we commissioned a study at the end of last year to understand the consumer buying behaviors and the interest on going to a digital dealership. And we've seen a rise of 80% year over year. People, 80% of those that replied to the survey and the study are willing to make a purchase of a vehicle online. So that's a shift from like 15% the year before to 80% now. So you can imagine the supply chain disruption that's created and that we're able to service for the industry.
I mean, that's a perfect example of almost like a smaller, if you wanted to kind of lay out the bullwhip effect for someone new to logistics, right? Some relatively minor changes in the consumer behavior can cause havoc not that far up the supply chain, right? I mean, the difference between walking into a dealer, a brick and mortar dealer, and going with a digital dealer, you're still kind of going through the same process, albeit digitally enabled, but that can arguably completely change the fulfillment of that, order, if you will, right?
Yeah, the fulfillment and just the money-making model. So if you think upstream back into a brick and mortar store, they're obviously providing service and they're providing F&I solutions to their customer base. So how do we take and help enable our customers to continue to provide that to their customers and their end consumers? But absolutely, there's a big change in the supply chain and the ability to white glove and stick that delivery of that car to a home or an office within a very small time window. We're all busy. We're all trying to manage ourselves and manage our time very effectively. So that's been a big change.
All right, so if we think about, we've all been kind of forced to learn and adapt over the last 15 to 18 months with COVID and the global disruptions and an active tropical season and then an active winter, right? It's been kind of a bingo card of disruptions. What are some of the main takeaways you hope to apply to your business over the next 12 to 18 months at ACERTUS?
Yeah, so what we've learned in the past, right? I mean, even in my previous, lives and careers, what we've learned is communication is key. So when the pandemic hit, everybody was scrambling and everybody was trying to figure out how to communicate better, whether it was internal or externally. So that's important to have a good foundation and backbone of communication, and then have focus on downside protection. What we've learned through the pandemic, whether at ACERTUS or other places, is we always have to have a plan B. So understanding what the downside protection is in your business for ACERTUS, the OEM shortage, and the car shortage, the supply chain disruptions in the OEM space has created an opportunity for us to really lean into the remarketing space or the secondary or used car space, which I'm very proud of the team. Obviously, I've been on board here for a month, and the team has been, building this and really leaning into that used car sector much longer than that. But, the numbers that they've been able to produce and really the service back to our customers has been second to none. So really proud of that. So I think those are really, really fundamental is just having that high communication and really leaning into some downside protection should something happen.
I love that. That's something new. We talk about this a lot in this format and with our customers, and it's a lot around relationship and communication, but I love that concept of a backup plan. The former boss told me, I'd rather have someone that had a really good backup plan than someone who was supremely confident in plan A, right? Because in the unlikely event that even the best plan A fails, if there's no plan B, or at least not a good plan B, you're going to leave your customer or your partner hanging out there, out to dry.
Yeah, there's an old saying, right? Mike Tyson, everybody has a plan until somebody gets punched in the mouth.
Yeah, and I think we can all agree that 2020 and so far 21 has been a bit of a punch in the mouth to our economy and our industry specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you said, the auto logistics space, very analogous to the freight market. The same pressures, the same capacity constraints are happening with just a smaller subset of the FMCSA registrations. So you've got even, I think, a more compressed ability there to, continue to service with times and service levels. And failed to mention, there's this unique transition in the auto logistics space where now it's harder to find cars. So the drivers and the carriers out there are having to drive farther and take more stops to actually pick cars up. So not going to an auto auction where they're picking a full, rack of 9 cars. They're having to stop off at 3 different locations to then fill up their car. So length of haul is increasing, stop counts increasing. Those are all pressures on capacity.
I love that. I mean, that's something that people who aren't as close to the industry don't understand, is that you can see a reduction in capacity by not losing a single truck, right? If your capacity becomes less efficient by increased deadhead, increased stop, increased load and unload or dwell times at docks, those all reduce, right? Because capacity is really hours, right? In a perfect world, we'd measure capacity in the number of legal hours that are available out there to move and load and unload freight. And that's a really great way to think about losing capacity due to inefficiency, not just drivers exiting the market, for sure.
Yeah, one other analogous point there is the fact that consumers are now buying 80% SUVs. SUVs are larger than sedans and small compact cars. So that simple buying behavior is also putting continued pressure on port processors that can't store as many. We have storage yards, so we're storing vehicles, prepping and like reconditioning work. We can't put as many cars on our lots, and then the carriers can't put as many vehicles on their equipment. And you've got a transition to EVs, which are now heavier. So that also will play upstream into the supply chain, with obviously the carriers not being able to haul as many vehicles because they're overweight.
Yeah, I mean, I'll end it on this because we could go all day, but if you think about different packaging shifts, bottles and cans there's 10 truckloads if you're shipping bottles and cans versus the mix in a bag for commercial, for like beverages, right? So the analogies just seem to go on forever around the loss of efficiency due to small shifts in consumer behavior.
That's right. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting time, and we're positioned here to service our customers in many different ways, and that's one solution that we'll continue to solve for upstream up into these into our customers.
So a couple more questions for you. One came up in kind of me digging in on ACERTUS. You guys were recognized as one of the fastest growing companies by Inc. magazine. Can you just, first impressions and digging in and rolling up your sleeves, can you tell us more about that, and what do you attribute that growth to, based on your relatively short onboarding so far?
Yeah, Ken, thanks for the recognition there, and that's obviously goes back to the team at ACERTUS across the board. So 2 years running, Inc.'s fastest growing companies. A little foreshadowing here. I'm suspecting a third, given our current trajectories right now.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, spoiler alert. I think really that comes down to the commitment from everybody as part of the team. I have very few times have I run across a team, and part of the ethos and the thesis of me actually joining the team was how well they work together. Founder Bill and Scott and many others that have been with the company are really in it for the right reasons, and they're in it to help each other. No egos, no issues across the board, and it's been a fantastic ride so far since I've been on board with ACERTUS. I think what's really grown with ACERTUS is leveraging our technology. They lean into technology. We've got a proprietary system, a marketplace where we're really fundamentally enabling our shippers or those that are trying to move VINs find capacity easier. All right, we always talk about internally here, just be the easiest to do business with and you'll win. And I fundamentally believe that. And then the last is those acquisitions that we made. We made a couple strategic acquisitions a few years back that really enable a 55 location network of storage, prep, and white glove home delivery service. And then a title and registration company, which many people don't know that we do. And what happens is now you've got this car haul, a title or registration, and a footprint domestically that's best in class. And you can pick up a car from someone's house, store it, light reconditioning, prep it, and then deliver it with plates on white glove delivery service to another house, dealership, or wherever that may go. So that supply chain, it's an end-to-end logistics solution, what I term as logistics as a service, has really elevated ACERTUS, and I think will continue to do in the foreseeable future.
That's awesome. Thanks for going through all that. So one last question that I try to ask everyone, and I'm especially curious on your answer given your experience in the industry. What are some of the big things that you see coming down the pike for our industry over the next few years?
Yeah, well, hopefully, first and foremost, some normalcy. If there is such a thing, I think we are a very cyclical industry. There's no shocker there. Those that have been in the industry for more than maybe 3 years, if we go pre-COVID, understand that it's a very cyclical industry. We've got seasonality trends that you can pretty much, really stick a budget to in most years pre-COVID. So hopefully we'll see some normalcy. We'll see things come back to, from an OEM perspective. We'll see those supply chains for semiconductors come back maybe inshore or at least multi-sourcing from these OEMs so that we're not in these binds that we have today. So I think it'll really be a transition to less single threading and more understanding on how you can diversify a little bit so you've got that downside protection like we talked about earlier.
Love it. Yeah, I think, the supply chain has reacted differently to this event, I think, in 2021 than it did in 18. And the focus on relationships to me has been a key differentiator. So I agree with you. It'll be really interesting to see what happens when we even start to shade towards normal. Right? I don't know that we'll ever go back. I don't know if you can put that toothpaste back in the tube, but, as we start moving in the direction of normal, is what I've been using lately. It'll be really interesting to see.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's definitely forever changed. I think it was a catalyst for change, which I think a lot of these behaviors that we've talked about were already in motion, considering just work from home, right? Or some hybrid model. Those were already in motion in a lot of different companies, but this has just simply been a catalyst to speed that up.
For sure. Well, I really want to thank you, Trent, for joining us and spending time with us. I've been in this industry for a while. I've learned a lot just in this conversation. It was really cool to hear what ACERTUS does. Kind of made it jump off the page from just hopping onto your website. It sounds like you're really making kind of an end-to-end solution that delights your customers. So thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. That's what we're here to do is really service the auto logistics space and do it to the best of our ability, and we'll continue to lean forward in that technology that we've got, and look forward to you and your success, and thanks for having us on board.
For sure, and best of luck as we round out 21. Thanks again.
Yeah, likewise. Take care, everybody.
Thanks again for checking out this week's Freight Focus podcast, and a special thank you to our guest Trent Broberg of ACERTUS. The best way to be alerted and informed of future content is to like and subscribe. And if you want to also check out our Freightvine podcast as well as our other content, you can visit dat.com/podcasts. Thanks again and have a great rest of your week.